thank you to the CoinGeek crew and production crew for putting this event on. We've certainly learnt quite a lot over the last sessions that we've been listening to with regards to how blockchain BSV can assist in various industry verticals. The one that I'm particularly going to focus on, or we're going to focus on now, is the online gaming space. And we're going to sort of talk about data segmentation and player profiling. Data captured and stored immutably on a blockchain can then be used to build a picture of a player's activity. We can enrich the player's experience by suggesting gameplay. We can do all sorts of things with regards to enhanced bonusing. But more importantly, it gives you the ability to be able to embed in the player's user journey markers of harm, and we can get involved into responsible gaming. Responsible gaming and also AML and as well as KYC. Now, responsible gaming is a very, very hot topic, especially in the regulated markets of Europe at the moment. And the traditional sort of responsible gaming tools that are being used are, in my opinion, they're not as effective as they could be. So using blockchain, I feel, would be able to benefit the industry a lot more in being a lot more transparent, a lot more open, and will assist not only the player in their journey through a site, but also the operator to help mitigate against any sort of player harms that may be, and also intervene with player behaviour. And we're going to talk about responsible gaming and also anti-money laundering and KYC and how this can be used. So, touching on that sort of responsible gaming side, and since we've got one of the regulators here, from a regulator's perspective, how big is problem gambling for you, Brandon?
Problem gambling is definitely a problem, and is one of the main reasons why gambling needs to be regulated in the first place, in order to ultimately ensure that players are safe and partaking in gambling activities within a safe ecosystem. So yeah, this is definitely something that regulators across the industry seek to address and emphasize on, especially in terms of regulatory compliance and when it comes to making sure that operators are in line by means also of enforcement action. So yeah, it's definitely an important aspect of the gambling industry as a whole.
Right, yes. So we know that it's important, but then there's a lot more growing pressure upon the regulators to sort of levy fines upon the gaming operators. And last year in 2020, there was something like £44 million issued in fines from the UK GC as well as other European regulated countries. So far in 2021, in Q1, there's been £24 million issued in gambling fines for breaches of responsible gaming. So, going over to the operator, what do you see this benefiting you as an operator, Sam? How does maybe using blockchain, or what are you doing to sort of mitigate these fines or potential fines, or identifying potential problem players?
So, I mean, let's start with what we are doing, and obviously that is dictated by lots of different jurisdictions and different regulatory points in each market. But generally, as you indicate, Nick, it's about identifying markers of harm. It used to, back in the day, be about retrospectively identifying them. More recently, it's become about proactively identifying them and be able to move in when we even get somewhere even close to a marker. To answer the second part of the question, what could blockchain bring to this? I think one of the the sort of classic pitfalls that operators have fallen into historically is, even if they have gone about their business in the correct way, followed the correct procedures, often where they fall down is being able to prove that. So having some sort of universal and trusted system where they can prove to the regulator, hey, yeah, this is what we did. We followed the right protocols with source of wealth, with AML. All the correct KYCs were in place. We had these triggers. We made the following moves, and these contacts and these interventions were made. The problem is that the system for that is not so universal. So one of the key early areas I would see as an advantage would be that, to have some sort of trusted and universal repository for this type of information that the regulator seeks as proof.
Yeah, exactly that. So moving over to you, Simit, coming from an nChain perspective, how can nChain or how can BSV community assist with this problem that there's no central repository for this data?
Yeah, I think Sam makes a good point in that if you don't have a central reference point for all of this information, you are still going to, create gaps. Data silos is probably one of the biggest issues with being able to kind of deliver a responsible gaming platform or service. And so when we think about the blockchain, we think about what the blockchain delivers. It gives us a tamper-resistant, or the ability to create tamper-resistant events. Capturing events, capturing data, capturing context, capturing interactions, and storing them in a way that we can maintain the integrity of that data, but then also create that traceability. And the value comes in that having a single public ledger in which you capture this information, it then becomes possible for other entities, other platforms, and other operators to reference the same information. And we always use this term, single source of the truth, and that's what the blockchain delivers.
Yes, yeah, exactly that. So, Sam, are you sort of like embedding these markers of harm within your sites now that are picking up, they're like, almost like a traffic light signal? So if a player moves from, green to an amber zone, they are sort of flagged, and maybe bonuses are started to be retracted. You're not engaging with the player as much. If they move on through the traffic light signal to red, maybe there's a pop-up coming up. Are you doing this already?
Yeah, so we have many proactive models. We can actually start building a profile on a player from transaction number one. And the way we look at it is we look at a value score for a player, a risk score for a player, and then a confidence interval that we have in that information. And so as that player progresses through their life cycle, our confidence improves that our model is working and that our sort of scoring is correct. But yeah, you're exactly right. The minute that players cross certain thresholds, actions are taken, and that can be for a number of reasons. One, because regulators specify certain milestones, and at those milestones, documents are required. But also, a lot of that is self-inflicted on our side, where we're always looking, as there's been the sort of buzzword in the UK, affordability, but that is a really good measure. If you have an understanding of the affordability of your customer, it's not super complex to build in a model to understand when they're getting towards a risky type of behavior, risky type of spend. Or as you say, Nick, the other obvious one is a break in habit, a break in their trend, so a significant increase in the volume of transactions, the time spent on site, the amount spent in those transactions, etc.
Right, yes. Yeah, exactly. So going back to Brendan, how does the regulator feel about using sort of this progressive technology to enhance and protect a player's experience? What are the rules that are coming out from the regulatory body?
Yeah, so from the MGA's perspective, we make a distinction between using blockchain as a payment method or using DLT in the actual gaming environment, and also using blockchain as a utility tool, one of them being for responsible gaming or for AML. So in the case of the latter, the law actually requires operator to implement analytical tools in order to detect problem gambling and also to address it. So in this case, the law is quite technologically neutral, so it doesn't specify whether this needs to be done in terms with blockchain, with AI, etc. But ultimately, if blockchain is used in order to boost regulatory compliance in this regard, we have no reservation as a regulator if a particular operator does this with blockchain.
Okay, so Matthew, just a brief introduction, because I know both Sam as an operator and the regulator Brandon. Can you just give us a little overview on where you're coming from? Because I know that you come from a slightly different background with AML and KYC. Can you just give us a quick overview?
Absolutely, yeah, pleased to be here. It looks like the conference is going really well, so I can't be there in person. But yeah, I work with mainly financial institutions around the world, so Middle East, China, Australia, on a lot of fintech, so a lot of AI, a lot of blockchain, and obviously I work with regulators quite frequently around the world too, because everything starts with regulation in terms of innovation. So that's why I'm familiar with KYC and AML in this space, is mainly through working with financial providers.
Right. So we've heard a lot over the last day and a half with regards to sort of AML and KYC working across many different sectors. But we now want to sort of bring it into the gaming sector, because all this information is stored on various disparate systems. So how would we go about doing that within the gaming sector? Is there something that is available from nChain in the BSV community that could address the gaming fraternity, shall we say?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when we talk about KYC and AML, it's a set of compliance requirements that other businesses and other industries also have to kind of adhere to. We heard from a company yesterday where they're doing something similar. They've got KYB, so know your business, and they're capturing every time they go off and do a check, and they capture every event and interaction they have with those data items. And again, we've done a lot of work with banks in terms of how we can enhance existing KYC and AML processes, how we can create, again, this tamper-resistant stream of events related to KYC, AML, and over time start building up a repository of KYC and AML data. Now, one of the biggest benefits of kind of enhancing KYC and AML with blockchain is you can start capturing the context of these checks, the context of the individual, and the context of the interactions. So over time, you start building a reference set of information that you can then use to make decisions on whether the individual can onboard or enroll into a different service, a different platform. And the main benefit of doing that is it frees up organizations, especially back office staff, in order to focus on more of the middle office, front office, going out, getting new customers, making more money. And so the blockchain can help in terms of managing the efficiencies of KYC and AML overheads.
Right, yes, yeah, that was very interesting. So how, again, I come to you, BSV providing these solutions, what's all, you've got company, they're providing the solutions that are already available. Is there anything else that's coming out from nChain that can help address the need now with regards to sort of responsible gaming? Because that's something that's quite passionate to me, because it starts with gambling, but it also can go into the gaming fraternity. We've been hearing about sort of crypto fights and other sort of gaming entities, and gambling is being used within the gaming world. Is there any other sort of products that are off the shelf, shall we say?
So yeah, I mean, at nChain we have a platform that has a number of different products. one of which is a product that allows us to create a digital fingerprint, if you like, of data and information and store that on chain. And it's that service, that company you're using. When we talk about responsible gaming, it's also relevant to look at what we're doing with EHR data.
Right.
Now, I can't remember if it was Sam or Matthew who mentioned the concept of preventative, being able to identify problem gaming before it happens. When we look at what we're doing with EHR data, the whole vision and strategy for EHR data is to be less reactive and more proactive in the way you identify, the way you treat, and the way you manage your health. And so if we start capturing this information, we capture information related to how many games they play, how many spins they do, and especially when we consider the blockchain as a kind of a universal single source of the truth. You can capture this information from different games, different platforms, different operators, and so you start building this kind of profile of an individual. You capture all of the data, and then you can start using this data to make decisions. You can start identifying markers, as Sam mentioned, and so you can move into a more proactive way of profiling, and then using that profile data to maybe intervene before problem gaming becomes an issue. And so we look at healthcare, and it's a very similar concept. With EHR data, we focus a lot on opioids. Tracking opioid use, opioid prescriptions, with a view to trying to identify when the level of opioid usage is becoming a problem, and then intervening when that occurs. And so we're looking at being more preventative in the way we kind of manage, opioids and kind of healthcare. And so the same concept can apply here. And so the same solution we use for EHR data is a solution we can deploy here very quickly.
Right. So, Sam, you've always sort of said to me, there needs to be some sort of form of incentivization. How are we going to incentivize the operators? How are we going to incentivize the content providers to start to use and work with blockchain sort of technologies? How do you see that evolving? What would the incentive be for you as an operator to get involved in some form of blockchain BSV technology?
I think the obvious opportunities are where the data leaves our business, enters another business, leaves that business, and brings back some better information. So when you start to build these wider data communities, and in much the same way that things like credit scores work, and a lot of actually the new European market regulations that are coming through. I'm thinking specifically Germany and Holland. There is a requirement there where there's sort of one specific self-exclusion list where all operators are dialing into the same list. And I think those are good examples of where the technology can be sort of enforced at an early stage, so we understand, okay, this is where a very safe, secure place where we can enter in our data and we can extract data in a healthy way for our businesses and in a healthy way for our players. And so that's always for me been the struggle, where there's I've always told you, Nick, I'm very underwhelmed by the use of this technology in our industry. And the more I think about it, as you say, it is just about basically the economics of incentive. We have all of these disparate sources of data. The industry's going very well. We get somewhat greedy. The incentive for us to sort of suddenly move away into a new technology on our own as an operator, if I was to say for Hero Gaming, the incentive is very limited. But if we could come together as an industry or as a group of companies within an industry and use blockchain technology to create central data repositories from which everyone can benefit, this is, I see, as the sort of first obvious point where we would become incentivized to take part.
Right. So the responsible gaming is just one aspect, but if we were then to sort of wrap that with sort of like maybe an AML and a KYC policy, how would that be adopted? You know, do you see that working within gaming from your perspective, Matthew?
Sure, well, I see some parallels here. I guess financial services a little bit further ahead. We're talking to Citigroup and other tier one banks about compliance as cash. So the idea of being able to not have fines, essentially, by gathering this information early, by being more morally responsible, by flagging problems with gamers and problems with methods. Very, very valuable. So you know, tier one banks are seeing this as a cash incentive. And the other thing I noticed too is the ability to get ahead of the game. So we've seen the financial services industry be overtaken by all these new technologies. You know, 2% of global money supply is now in crypto. It was 1% a year ago. So yes, you get compliance as cash, number one. And number two, you also get the ability to stay ahead of the game. And you also get the ability to have this conversation with the regulator and develop regulations with them around crypto, rather than being behind the game and being subjected to.
Right. So flipping that over to you then, Brandon, you know, what is the not the MFSA, but the MGA, looking at doing more so with regards to the regulation of crypto, not so much crypto, but blockchain? You know, are they embracing it?
So yeah, I think that the MGA has always been at the forefront in this regard, and we have indeed issued the sandbox environment, whereby we are allowing operators to actually incorporate this technology within their gaming ecosystem, both as using crypto as a means of payment, and also implementing the technology in the actual game environment, for instance, using smart contracts in order to automate payouts. And we have just recently issued the first license in this regard. So our plan is to continue monitoring the sector and see how we can improve the existing framework in this regard. Indeed, the sandbox regulations that we had issued consisted of a we call it a sandbox paper, and it was always we always had the intention rather for it to be a live document, in order for it to be updated as we go along, both in order to reflect updates with the communications that we have with our operators, and also to take into consideration the regulatory developments that are taking place across the industry in this regard. Indeed, in Malta, we have adopted what we call an interdisciplinary approach in this regard. So the regulation of blockchain is not limited to one authority, but there are other authorities in play, not just the MGA, but there's also the MFSA, which is the financial regulator, and the MDIA, which is responsible for the technology side, and also there is the MDIA, the FIAU, which is responsible for the AML side. So yeah, we basically aim to continue monitoring and keep updating our framework as we go along.
Right. That's refreshing to hear. You touched on there sort of like, you know, with the processing side of things. So from, you know, an nChain point of view, is there anything sort of in the pipeline with regards to processing, or, you know, stable tokens or anything?
So yes, processing of payments.
Yeah.
So yes. So earlier this morning we talked about Tuvalu and deploying a digital cash solution there, and so at nChain we're doing a lot of work in terms of creating solutions for the two forms of money, one which is a digital form of cash, and one that I guess you can reference as private money. And it's these private money tokens that we're kind of deploying as well for a gaming client in the US, which you would have heard about yesterday. And so those applications and products are in the pipeline. They are things we're focusing on. Because one of the biggest benefits of a digital form of money, especially within iGaming on blockchain, is it fundamentally decreases the overhead costs of processing. It's far cheaper than, you know, Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, Stripe, But then it gives you this added layer of functionality that traditional payment systems can't. We talked about KYC and AML. You can capture that context of KYC and AML with the payment itself. You can then use the digital payment system to kind of build an incentive mechanism around the data that we're capturing for profiling of individuals, gaming habits. And so you've already got an embedded payment system that allows you to then do micropayments and nano payments and incentivize platform and gaming operators to share this data, to exchange this data. And so we always see this kind of convergence of data and value, and that's kind of driving what we're doing internally at nChain.
Right, that's good stuff. So Matthew, you're sort of like pretty chain agnostic, and you're getting more and more familiar with BSV because I keep harping on about it. But can you see the adoption of sort of BSV blockchain more so in some of the verticals that you've been working in, like slightly outside of the gaming? I know that Lysis Group work with a number of big tier one sort of gaming operators for outsourced AML and KYC, but can you see it being adopted in the wider community?
Certainly, we're just looking at speed, really, and also the ability to have appropriate levels of privacy, which is, happens with any blockchain. But when you have this level of speed and block clearance, that is a big incentive. Right.
So, okay, we're sort of coming up to sort of the end of our session here, but just want some key takeaways. So, from an operator's perspective, what would you like to see apart from this overall sort of Havana, an iGaming passport, for want of a better word? What would you like to see from the community or the BSV community or the blockchain community to really get Hero Gaming and other gaming companies involved?
Yeah, for me, as I say, we're so immature in this technology. Almost any positive move which can be adopted by a group of tier one gaming companies it has to be the starting point. Exactly what that starting point is, I don't know, but given how close we work with regulators, and that's something that we all have in common, it does feel like this is an area where gaming companies would be much more open to explore and begin this type of thing together, rather than anything that was inherently commercial. I mean, if it's anything to do with payment processing, and this is a very individual and very competitive part of our space, probably not something that we're going to come together as a community, but of course something like regulation, player protection, all the areas we've discussed today, they are the most obvious points because everyone has a mutual interest and a mutual benefit in making this a much safer, slicker, and more proactive process.
Right. So, having said that then, so from the regulator's perspective, if we could get the gaming community to all talk amongst themselves and come to the regulator and present a solution that made everybody's lives that little bit easier, is that something that the regulator would look at embracing and not just sort of forcing more regulation down onto the operators and the content providers?
I was saying that we would definitely be open to discussing with the industry, as we did in the past, in order to come up with solutions that make everyone's lives easier, both from an operator's perspective and also from a regulator's perspective as well. I mean, we always try to aim to not stifle technological development. Our aim is not to over-regulate, but to keep the industry sustainable and to continue developing. I mean, the gaming industry has always been a dynamic one, and I think that, at least from the Maltese jurisdiction's perspective, the we always aim to try to allow it to develop further and increase the attractiveness of the industry as a whole. And if that technological development can also lead to the bolstering of regulatory compliance, whether it is in terms of responsible gaming or AML, we would definitely be willing to sit down with our operators and discuss possible solutions.
Right, good. Well, on that note, as we're coming to the end here, I'd just like to thank each of the panelists, Brandon from the MGA, Sam Brown from Hero Gaming, and Matt from Lysis, and obviously everybody knows Simit here from nChain. So yes, thank you very much, gentlemen. We've come to the end of our session, and hopefully it's all been a little bit more informative with regards to the online gaming space for the audience here physically in Zurich. Thank you very much.
Imagine in 1997 paying for something with your watch. Remember the last time you used cash? The world has been digitized. Almost.
Cash was once seen as the last bastion for reform, but now is on the decline. Digital transactions have outcompeted hard currency since 2017 in the UK, but breakthrough bold technologies like blockchain have revolutionized more than just money.
Disruptive technologies call for disruptive lawyers, ones that don't just accept the current, but find new ways of interpreting the law. We are currently the only global law firm with a real track record in the area of Bitcoin and blockchain. We are results-driven and care only about securing the best possible result for our clients.
We trace the supposedly untraceable. We pioneer the future of law. We deliver new solutions. We are law changers.